My
No problem, Shahar.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
bad. So it's probably only us.
Yes, right now it is, but we may have some more people coming. Again, it's Houston has a lot of weather. I mean, you're on the generator, that's great. But yeah, this is something important that I wanted to bring to everybody and definitely have it recorded so people can go back and just kind of look through, because we're going to cover a lot of material today. So I'm going to get started. Again, for anyone who joins in, if you want to ask questions, put it in the chat. I'll be checking the chat throughout this. We just have so many slides to go over that I want to just get started, okay?
Is this about the new lawsuit, or it's just an general update?
No, Shahar, this is all about the NAR settlement, how the settlement is affecting all of the forms that Texas Realtors just released last week.
Okay.
So this is all about the new forms. We're going to do somewhat of a deep dive. But again, if you have any questions even after this, and if you're watching this as a recording, please just reach out to me, email me if you have questions. I'm also going to have a resources slide coming up in the next few slides. So I recommend, excuse me, that you screenshot it so that you can go back and look into anything further that you have questions about. So I wanted to cover just the key points of the settlement to get us started, right? So settlement goals, it was to secure liability release for as many members, associations, and MLSs as possible, and to preserve consumer choices regarding their real estate services and compensation. So the key terms of this settlement was liability release for NAR and over 1 million members. It's realtor associations, MLSs, and small brokerages that are all members, okay? Compensation offers moved off the MLS platforms as of August 17th. Written agreements required for MLS participants working with buyers. That's also as of August 17th. They settled for $418 million, okay, over approximately 4 years. NAR denies any wrongdoing. So changes to compensation policy prohibits offers of compensation on the MLS platforms. More to come on that. Compensation can still be negotiated off the MLS. Sellers can offer buyer concessions on the MLS. So the timeline, preliminary approval granted on April 24th of this year, practice changes effective August 17th. And we expect the final approval hearing to be scheduled in November, and we don't expect it to not be approved, basically.
Forgive me to interrupt. So we're going to have the commission on the MLS or not?
We are not going to have the commission percentage on the MLS anymore as of August 17th. HAR is doing August 17th. I know some other, like Netris up in North Texas, they're taking it off in July. So yeah, changes are coming. So we've got to embrace these changes right away. So the rationale for the settlement of NAR, Trey, welcome. I'm just going over the overview of the settlement just to get us started. Yeah, so they're reducing liability, they're avoiding prolonged litigation and uncertainty, they're providing a path forward for the industry. So there were some exclusions, some of the larger brokerages, Home Services of America, those were all excluded. So they are not included in that release of liability. They had their own settlement outside of this. Please note there's no changes in NAR membership dues, they're saying, for the next 2 years. Okay. So here are the rule changes, and I'm going to read these so we understand them. Eliminate and prohibit any requirement of offers of compensation in the MLS between listing brokers or sellers to buyer brokers or buyer representatives. Eliminate and prohibit MLS participants, subscribers, and sellers from making any offers of compensation in the MLS. to buyer brokers. Requiring the MLS to eliminate all broker compensation fields in the MLS. And we're saying compensation here, which is the new word for commission. They're not saying commission anymore, it's compensation. This does not include concessions. We'll get to that in a minute. Require the MLS to create, facilitate, or support any non-MLS mechanism for participants to make offers of compensation. So you can't have any, we're getting into it, the aggregator sites. Yeah, here we go. Prohibit the use of MLS data or IDX feeds to directly or indirectly establish or maintain a platform of offers of compensation. So such use must result with the MLS terminating your access to the IDX. Reinforce that MLS participants and subscribers must not, and MLSs must not, enable the ability to filter out or restrict MLS listings that are communicated to customers or clients based on the existence or level of compensation. Require compensation disclosures to sellers, as well as prospective sellers and buyers. Require MLS participants working with a buyer to enter into a written agreement with the buyer prior to touring a property. Okay, that's setting the stage for our whole presentation. This is the resources screen that I recommend you taking a screenshot of. This is a great list of things for you to look at to keep you updated. The following forms that I'm going to be going over, if you have suggested changes to the forms, you are welcome to email forms@texasrealtors.com. They want to hear from you. They want to hear from the people who are out there in the field using the forms, and to see if it needs to be changed, because, you know, we're definitely going to have people bringing suggestions, and that's great. And here's the legal hotline. I suggest you keep that legal hotline number on your phone if you don't have it already. And just note that me being your broker, I do get notified of your calls. So just so you know. Okay, so we're going to go through the list of updated forms. There's 19 changes, okay? 19 forms that were changed or new. Here are the updated forms we're going to go over. We aren't going to go over the farm and ranch listing agreement just for the sake of time. The changes are similar to the other two that we're going to talk about. Here's more changes. The current 1501, the buyer tenant rep, which we're calling the BRA. I mean, a lot of people in the state are calling it the BRA, so I'm going to start doing that. The 1501 BRA is now called the long form. There is a short form. We're going to talk about that too. And then there's some other changes here. There are new forms. This short form, the 1507, the 2406, the addendum regarding brokers' fees, and then this 2701, the amendment to representation agreement. We're going to go into all of these forms. The amendment to representation agreement is a temporary form. It's only to update your clients if you already have a listing agreement or you already have a BRA signed with that buyer, just to get you through, okay? Just to get it current to the current terms of the settlement. Okay, so before we start, do I have to get my old agreements updated to the new changes? Yes. We will talk about this later, but old listing agreements and the old BRAs must be updated, and this is the form 2701. It has to be updated by August 17th. However, it makes sense to amend now instead of waiting. Now, this includes anything that's pending or anything that's active. Just you're not under contract yet. You still want to get them updated to the terms. Okay. Excuse me, I've had a cough for a few weeks. I've broken this down into 3 segments. So we're going to talk about listing contracts first, and then we're going to talk about the buyer-tenant agreements, and then we're going to talk about compensation forms. And at the very end, we'll do a nice summary to kind of give you an example of when to use each forms, because I know it took some time of studying these forms for me to get my head wrapped around, okay, when do I need to use all of these? So if it's the same for you, don't worry, we have it written down at the end of this slide deck. Okay, 1101. So that is our residential real estate listing agreement, exclusive right to sell. So portions of the language from paragraphs 5 and 8 have been revised and consolidated, and paragraph 8 is empty. It's now entitled reserved. So when you see it there, it's just reserved. And that is so if we want to put something in there later, we will. So paragraph 5 begins, broker compensation or the sharing of compensation between brokers is not set by law nor fixed, controlled, recommended, or suggested by the Association of Realtors, MLS, or any listing service. Broker compensation is fully negotiable. Brokers independently determine their fees. Okay, this is the terminology, the language that's going to be on all of the forms now. So we have to get used to that, and we have to get used to explaining that to our clients. So here it is. Oh, excuse me. So number 5 was definitely reworded and kind of blended in with 8. So seller A, seller agrees to pay the buyer broker right here. So the seller 5A, the broker's fee with compensation for other broker. So you can put in here 5A1A, a percentage of the sales price, or you can put a fixed like amount. And then B is for other. So it's open in case you want other. And then you put it here, 5A12. Now 5B is the broker's fee without compensation for the other broker. So I want you to be aware though, if you're using 5B, 5B does not mean that you have to be careful if this turns into an intermediary relationship, because if you put, say, 3%, 5BA, the seller's not willing to pay the other broker, right? They're only going to pay 3%. That means that if it turns into an intermediary situation, the seller's only willing to pay you 3%, not more than that. So you would have to do an amendment after that, but you have to be very careful because that could definitely change things at the end if you haven't paid attention to that. Do you have any questions about that? Good morning, Lee. Thanks for joining us. Good morning.
Yeah.
Okay. We are recording this in case you want to watch it later.
Okay.
Okay, so that was 8, the 8 part that got removed. Now we're still talking about the listing agreement, the right to sell, Lee. And so we went back and we talked about the main thing here. So seller does or does not. This is a key point here. So 11F, the seller does or does not authorize the broker to share with other brokers and prospective buyers that they're considering contributing an amount to that buyer. So if your seller is willing to give any sort of concessions towards their expenses, and if they're including buyers' brokers' fees, then you need to have an understanding here that they do or do not authorize the broker to advertise. And there is a form. So if they say the seller does, you need to then go right off to the 1412. And we'll talk about that form in just a little bit. That is the form, seller's authorization to disclose and advertise certain information. So I want to go on and say, where can you advertise compensation? So we've already talked about how you can't put it in the MLS. You can't put it on an aggregate website that has a feed to the MLS, so an IDX feed. You can't put the compensation there. So where do you put it, right? How do you get it out there? Well, you can put it on yard sign riders. If you like that idea, buyer's agents welcome. You can put broker's fees available. You can put those on a rider on a sign. You can put them on property flyers. You can put them on social graphics, right? You can make a social graphic and say commission. I wouldn't say commission. I would say broker's fees available. That's what I would say. because we're not using the term commission anymore. We're using the term compensation. You could also put it on your own website if you do not have an IDX feed. Okay, it's all about the IDX feed.
Kathy, can you put the amount you're paying on the flyers and
Oh yeah. Yeah, you
Okay.
can put the compensation on a flyer.
riders or whatever, 3% or whatever it
Yes,
is?
you can say 3% compensation and use the word compensation. Don't say commission anymore. We're just not saying commission.
Why is that? I mean, what difference does it make?
Compensation, because commission relates to an exact percentage, and compensation can be a flat fee. It can be separate from just a percentage. So they want to include compensation as the overall. I mean, you might be getting compensation from a bonus from the builder. So they wanted to use a word that was more all-encompassing.
Okay.
Okay. So the right to lease, this is the 1102, the residential listing agreement right to lease. Excuse me. The changes are all very similar to the 1101 that we just talked about, but it's geared towards lease listings. So right here, it just has a little bit more detail. So 5A, again, 5 and 8 were combined. So 8 is now empty. And 5A, that's when the broker's fee offers compensation for the other broker. And you're putting here exactly how it is. You're stating it's one percentage of a full month's rent, or it's the percentage of rents, total rents to be paid under that lease. So that's what it is. And C is always open on these listing agreements for other. So if that's a flat fee, whatever it is, you can put it there. Again, 5B is when they're not paying compensation for the other broker. So this would be just your side. And again, be careful for intermediary, because if you think someone from our brokerage is going to be on the other side, you want to make sure that you put that in there. You make sure they understand, okay, we're going to need to use 5A for intermediary. (1402) named exclusions. So what is a named exclusion? If the seller wishes to exclude specific buyers from the listing, they fill this out. Has anyone ever used a named exclusion? You have, Lee? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
No.
And was it a for sale by owner?
No, it was a listing where I guess it was a land listing and a rural land listing, and the owner knew that like his neighbor might buy it, or thought his neighbor might buy it. So we put it in there. The neighbor didn't end up buying it, so it was fine. But
Okay. Okay, that's a great example. Someone who thinks they might know someone who already wants to buy it, so they don't want to pay you if that person's going to buy it. Now, these, you want to make sure that if you're putting this named exclusion in there, everything has to be in writing, signed. You also need to put a time, a specific time period. So you need to say if they buy within 30 days of listing, or you've got to put a time in there so that all of your marketing and all of your efforts, can't be construed as procuring cause. Okay, 1403, exclusive agency addendum to the listing. So first of all, what is exclusive agency and how is it different from the exclusive right to sell listings? So first of all, we prefer exclusive right to sell. Excuse me. And this is because the broker earns a commission regardless of who procures the buyer. So that's why we want the exclusive right to sell. Now, if a seller wants to remain, if they want exclusive agency, then they're retaining their right to find a buyer independently without paying a commission to the broker. So this form would be signed to convert the listing agreement to an exclusive agency. All of these things are, Texas Realtors really set us up well because all of these things are going to be considered. We're going to see a lot more of these, the sellers not wanting to pay commission, basically. So that's what all these forms are here for. Hopefully you won't have to use these forms, not all of them, but some of these, if you have a specific situation and you're not sure how to put it on a form, just ask me because there's a form for that. There's a form for every situation. Okay, amendment to listing. So 1404, it amends the list price. It amends the new compensation fields, 5A or 5B. This only applies to 1101 and 1201, which 1201 we're not going into because it's the same changes as the 1101. So this form is only for those. And again, these NAR settlements, it's only for residential sales and residential leases. Okay, so here you go. Here is the amendment to the listing, and this changes it. So the broker's fee is changed, so you can change the broker's fee. The compensation paid to the other broker, this can change. Now, if you turn into an intermediary situation and you didn't have this signed initially with paying the other broker, you can change this here. And this is kind of small for me too. The broker compensation, I want to just explain or just read aloud what this bold, blue bold print is, because it's on almost all of the forms. Broker compensation, or the sharing of compensation between brokers, is not set by law nor fixed, controlled, recommended, or suggested by the Association of Realtors, MLS, or any listing service. Broker compensation is fully negotiable. Brokers independently determine their fees. Okay, so here is that 1412. This is the seller's authorization to disclose and advertise certain information. This entire form has been revised. It is used to confirm whether the seller is willing to contribute compensation to the buyer's broker. And it must be filled out. It must be if the seller allows you to disclose and advertise a buyer's broker compensation that's not in the MLS. So you would need this form if you're going to put it on your rider, if you're going to put it on your property flyer, anything like that. So this is it. Seller authorizes the broker to disclose other brokers and prospective buyers. The seller will consider contributing an amount up to, say, $10,000 toward the buyer's expenses. Buyer may use these funds to pay for the buyer's broker's fees or other expenses payable by the buyer under a sales contract. Now note, seller's not obligated to pay this amount or any other amount unless the seller agrees to such payment in a sales contract. It has to be in the sales contract for this to be warranted and for this to be executed. Seller has the sole discretion to determine the amount the seller will pay towards buyer's expenses during negotiations with the buyer. It has to be negotiated up front. If the amount of seller's contribution is included in the MLS, such amount cannot be limited to or conditioned upon the retention of or payment to a cooperating broker. So what they're saying here, the amount of seller's contribution, so many MLSs, including HAR, you're going to see a new field for seller's contribution or seller's concessions. So that doesn't mean that that is meant for you as the buyer's broker, fees like that. You can't say that's the same thing. So the seller could very well they don't want to pay the other broker, but they are still contributing to the buyer. So there's scenarios where you'll have to be very careful with what's basically everything that you're doing. You need to make sure that you're getting paid from the contract. You need to make sure that everything about your compensation is negotiated up front. So it's up front with the buyer. When you first meet that buyer, before you go on a tour, you're agreeing to your compensation right then and there. And then if you want the seller to pay any of it, it has to go in the contract. That protects you. Okay. So the seller authorizes the broker at the broker's discretion to disclose or advertise the following information concerning the property. So this could mean anything. This goes further than just compensation. This could be reasons why they're putting the property on the market, any conditions of sale, any phrases like bring all offers. You have to have them sign this form. Okay, 1417, the representation disclosure. So you want to use this form as much as you can to reduce your risk on every transaction. So you present this form to unrepresented buyers at an open house where you are the listing agent. Texas law requires a real estate licensee to disclose orally or in writing that they're a representation of a property in a proposed real estate transaction. So you would give them the IABS and you'd give them this representation disclosure. If you're the listing agent and your buyer's unrepresented and they gave you an offer, you're immediately giving them this representation disclosure and your IABS. So this is what it looks, what the changes look like. So concerning the property, you have to disclose the property address, and then you have to disclose our license number here and your license number. Now, if you are a DBA, you would put your DBA name here and our license number, 9011839. And then you'd put your name and your license. Okay, so then you say the broker, and we took out I represent the following because the broker is essentially the owner of all of the listings, all of your clients. The broker, that's Radius, that's the designated broker. So me, I represent the following property, the seller or the buyer or the tenant. You can put them both here. Use this form for either one. So a real estate license holder is acting as a fiduciary. So that's the code of ethics. The primary duty of the license holder is to represent the interests of the client. The license holder must treat all other parties to a transaction honestly and fairly. However, their duty to their client is primary. So this is really clear, right, to the consumer. Your duties lie with your client, not them. So then they're undersigning that they understand there's no agency relationship as of that date. Okay. So now, are there any questions before we move on to buyer tenant representation? We're good? Okay. Excuse me, hold on. Get a good cough out. Okay. Required by the settlement for all realtors. This is reinforcing, again, MLS participants working with a buyer must have a written agreement before touring the property. Any agent not working on behalf of the seller must have a written agreement prior to that tour. This includes live virtual tours that don't happen in person. So if you're hosting an open house and working for the seller, you do not need to have a buyer rep agreement with every single person that walks into that open house. This rule applies to residential properties, 1 to 4 dwelling units. Okay, 3 special provisions. The settlement also requires the written agreement with the buyer to contain these 3 special provisions. Number 1, the agreement must disclose the amount or rate the realtor will receive and how this amount will be determined. Number 2, the amount of compensation reflected in the agreement must be objectively ascertainable and may not be open-ended. So, for example, it cannot say the compensation amount will be whatever the seller is offering. The realtor, number 3, the realtor may not receive compensation for brokerage services from any source that exceeds that agreement. So if you're putting 2% on your buyer rep agreement and the seller is actually willing to give you 3%, you can't exceed that agreement. You would have to do an addendum to that agreement. And I'll show you what to do. Okay, the 1501, this is the long form. So this is the same form just revised, right? And the name is now long form because there is a short form. And people around the state are calling it the BRA, so let's start doing that. This is the long form BRA. So here you go. They're appointing you. The client appoints the broker to exclusive right to act. Number 3, the definition, though, you want to make sure and see it's as specific as possible. So don't just say, the state of Texas. You need to say either a property address, a subdivision, a city or a county, or even a zip code. You've got to be as specific as possible. And then, of course, you have to have a term beginning date. So here's the broker compensation. This looks very similar, right, to what we saw in the listing agreement. So again, it's talking about the compensation is not fixed. It's in bold and underlined. Broker's fee, when earned and payable, client will pay. So here's what the tenant is going to pay. I'm sorry, here's what the buyer is going to pay. Here's what the tenant's going to pay. The source of compensation. So the broker will seek to obtain payment of the fees specified in 7A, first from the seller, landlord, or agents. Now, if such persons refuse or fail to pay the broker the amount specified, the client will pay the broker the amount specified, less any amounts the broker receives from such persons. So if the buyer agreed to give you 3% and the seller is only giving you 2%, then the buyer will need to come up with that 1%. Earned and payable, broker's compensation is earned. This is all about procuring cause. You need to make sure that you've done everything you can to have earned that money, right? And it's outlined right here. Okay, so here's
Can you go back to the client's breach or whatever it was, the earned and payable?
yeah. Okay.
Client's breach. So I mean this whole lawsuit situation has, like, every third person I talk to is asking me more questions about commission.
Yes.
And a lot of agents are being really fast to drop their commissions just so they can get through and past the uncomfortable defense of their value. Like, they're quick to go to 4 or 5%, and a lot of them are wanting to put 2% and 1% on the buyer rep thing on MLS. And so I'm seeing some squirreliness out of people, like clients, right? They're trying to, like, they signed a document that says 6%, but hey, I heard about this lawsuit. Do I have to pay you 6%? And I'm like, well, yeah, we already executed an agreement. You're paying me 6%, right? And I'm just wondering, like, how many of those people, even though they signed an agreement, are going to try to get out of it somehow because their friend got some crappy agent across town who's doing it for 1%, So making sure that we understand a client's, like, obligation to this thing too.
Yeah, let's read this fully then. So broker's compensation is earned when client enters into an agreement to buy or lease property in the market area, or client breaches this agreement. So that means that if the client decides not to purchase with you, or they breach this and they buy the same property that you've shown them, but they buy it with another agent, they actually owe you money on this agreement. This is a binding agreement. And yes, people are going to get squirrely.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to see that over the next 6 months, maybe to a year, while people get comfortable, everybody gets comfortable with this process. But again, I would dive into just getting yourself completely up to speed. Like, you don't need to, worry about 10 things that you need to master today, but master 2 things. And that's your value. And you're giving that to them. You're telling them, this is what this is what, I mean, I am an excellent negotiator. Take more negotiation courses. There's a lot of things out there that you could do to enhance your negotiation. And so I would say dive in and just get really good with negotiation. And that is your key that you can give them as your value. That's an example. Whatever your niche is, whatever your expertise is, that's where you stand out in the sea of agents. And yes, there's going to be people who are like, I'll do that for $500. I'll just write you a contract. You're going to see those people. And does that really help the client? I mean, are they going to be protected? No, that's a limited service. Are they really going to be protected? Like, you just have to be great at negotiating. I think that's the key. But again, if they're signing this, they need to understand that this is binding. Okay, so this I'm just going to read through this because it's important to understand everything that's in this form. Acquisition of broker's listing. So this is the intermediary transactions. If a client acquires a property listed by the broker, any compensation broker offers to other brokers in the broker's listing agreement with the owner will be credited towards the broker's fees. This also goes back to what I was just saying. If they only agreed to 3% total compensation and you enter into an intermediary transaction, then your broker's only getting 3% for the entire transaction. So please note that. Okay, additional compensation. In addition to the broker's fees specified under paragraph 7A, broker is entitled to the following compensation. So, construction. If client uses broker services to procure or negotiate the construction of improvements to the property that the client owns or may acquire, the client ensures that the broker will receive from client or the contractor at the time the construction is substantially complete a fee equal to, right there. You have to explain it. If the broker refers client or any party to a transaction contemplated by this agreement to a service provider, for example, a mover, a cable company, utility, anything like that, broker may receive a fee from the service provider for the referral. It's just a blanket statement right there. Notice regarding bonuses and other compensation. In addition to broker's fees specified under paragraph 7A, the seller, landlord, or their agent may offer broker other compensation such as a bonus. If client purchases or leases certain properties, the broker will disclose the specific amount of other compensation offered to the broker. The broker may not receive other compensation unless authorized by client in writing. Client authorization may be made by amending this agreement. Okay, so you have a buyer and you've taken them to see a bunch of houses and they decided they want a new construction, a new build. You take them and that builder happens to be offering an extra bonus. You have to disclose that because that will be included now in that max amount that the client was willing to pay you. Is that clear to everybody? Okay. Protection period. Okay, so this is the protection period. You just have to disclose how many continuing days after this agreement is ended, not later than 10 days after this agreement ends. So the broker may send client written notice identifying the properties called to client's attention during this agreement. If client or a relative of the client agrees to acquire a property identified in the notice during the protection period, client will pay the broker upon closing the amount broker would have been entitled to receive if this agreement were still in effect. This paragraph, 7F, survives termination of this agreement, and 7F will not apply if client is, during the protection period, bound under a representation agreement with another broker who is a member of Texas Realtors at the time the acquisition is negotiated, and the other broker is paid a fee for negotiating the transaction. Escrow authorization, the client authorizes and broker may so instruct any escrow or closing agent authorized to close a transaction for the acquisition of property contemplated by this agreement to collect and disperse to broker all amounts payable to the broker. That just clears it up how we've already been doing it. Okay. And then you have to say the county here. Amounts payable to broker are to be paid in cash in whichever county you're in. Right there. You have to have that signed. Okay. And then this one was removed and moved. Okay. So now this is the short form 1507, the BRA, Buyer Tenant Representation Agreement, short form. It's a one pager. This is intended for, you can use it. It's basically two forms in one. It can be used to provide a full range of services, and it can be used for showing services only. And I have this in kind of a small print here. I don't know if you all can see this, but the 1507 at this time, we are not going to allow use of this form. And the reason being is that it's just really hard to monitor its use because you're giving it to people who aren't under contract. And there are compensation monitoring issues around it too. So if you say, I'm showing this property and you'll be giving the broker $100 upon execution of this. Well, what are you getting? A cash? What are you getting in Venmo? Like that doesn't really work for a lot of brokerages. So at this time, we're not going to be allowing this form. We can talk later if you really are questioning that. We want you to use the long form. Okay, 1507, amendment to the BRA, the buyer tenant rep. I'm still getting used to saying that. Okay, so this one would be used for, so we wouldn't be using C because that's the 1507, the short form, the amendment to the short form. So look at D. You would use D. That's the 1501. That's the long form that we just talked about, the buyer tenant rep. So if anything changes, so if the percentage of the sales price or the fixed amount, or if the lease, anything to do with compensation changes, you can put it here. And here's the bonus one. So if you figure out on E, if you figure out that you're actually going to be eligible for a bonus from the builder or the seller or whoever, and you're representing the buyer, you want to make sure that you put here what the bonus is and what the property address is. You have to have this signed if you're getting a bonus. Okay, 1506, general information and notice to buyers and sellers. This is a required form in every single transaction because it gives it outlines all of the FYIs basically to your client. And so compensation has been added to this. There's a compensation paragraph. And I'm just going to read this. Compensation means any commission, fee, or other valuable consideration for real estate brokerage services provided by a broker or agent. Broker compensation is not set by law and is fully negotiable. There are many different compensation models brokers may use, including commission, flat fee, hourly fee, and fees for specific tasks. The buyer may pay their broker directly, or seller or listing broker may offer to pay buyer's expenses, which can include broker fees. It just outlines the whole thing in a nutshell, basically. So here's form 2701. This is a new form. I have it marked in pink because it's a new form, amendment to the representation agreement. So yes, the title of this form is kind of misleading. The purpose is to convert any pre-settlement agreements that you're using to comply with these new settlement terms without re-signing any new forms, okay? So if you have existing forms, you want to use that 2701, and it's a temporary form. So once we're probably, I don't know, 6 months to a year after August 17th, you're not going to be needing this form. This form will be deactivated or something. It'll be gone. But you can use these. I would say use this form now if you have active clients. Just get the conversation going now versus August 17th when it's hard set mandatory. And here's the full form. It says draft, but these are all in your zip forms as of June 24th. All of the new forms, all of the revised forms are the forms that you're going to have access to. You don't have access to the old forms anymore. So Texas really is giving us a grace period, June 24th to August 17th. Okay, before I move on, any questions on that last segment? We're good? Okay. Compensation agreements. So 2401 is the compensation agreement between broker and owner. So this is a primary example is for sale by owner. You're using this when you are representing the buyer and the owner's unrepresented. Only some minor changes there, but the big one is the title. Instead of registration, it's compensation agreement. Okay, 2402, the ABB, the agreement between brokers. This one is known as the MLS replacement form. Okay. Excuse me. I have this residual cough. Okay, needed with every transaction file. Okay, the ABB. It's highly recommended that brokers and their associated licensees have this form executed before sending in your client's offer. This is executed by the listing broker and the buyer's broker before the offer is presented. Okay, this is really important, you guys. If you don't have this form signed prior, then the broker could, the other side, the other broker could just say, well, I didn't agree to that. It could get kind of ugly out there. So make sure that your compensation, your income is secure and protected with these forms. Okay, so here's a detailed look at it. So you are putting in the full address it has here, full address. You also want the email. So some of these minor changes. Property, you must put the full one in here. If you have a legal description, it's not going to be on this form. It's going to be in an attached exhibit now. Number 3, registration. The cooperating broker registers this client. You have to specify the client here. You're registering the client with that other brokerage. That's essentially what you're doing. Now, we're all comfortable. We've been doing this, right, with builders forever. Like, you have to register your client. So here again, the term, the agreement begins and ends. Give yourself a little bit of leeway. Don't just put the closing date. Give yourself, like, I don't know, a month later in case something is extended, so you don't have to keep going back. So make sure you're protected here. Okay, number 5, cooperating brokers' fees. Again, this is similar stuff that we've talked about before. So fees when earned and payable. Again, we're talking about procuring cause. So cooperative brokers' fees are payable. Like, look at this one, number 1. I wanted to really point this one out right here. If cooperating broker is the procuring cause of the sale or lease. So you have to be the procuring cause. This is drilled down in every single form that Texas has released. You have to be procuring cause. You have to be the one that has earned this compensation. Again, when the lease is executed or when a sale closes, all of this, this is in bold, any escrow or closing agent is authorized to pay the cooperating broker's fee from listing principal broker's fee at closing. So this just clarifies who's paying who. Any questions on that? Okay. And number 8, entire agreement. This is the other part that was revised. The very end, this agreement is the entire agreement. Okay, and may not be changed except by written agreement. This agreement supersedes any prior agreement between the parties concerning the same subject matter. So the same property, whatever. And so here, the listing principal broker's printed name and the listing broker's signature, the principal. Now, if you're signing, then you're going to be the broker's associate. So you're going to be checking that box and signing here. Even if you're a DBA and you want to be the signer, you would be the broker's associate here. Because I would be, unless you want me to sign, and I'm happy to, just send it to me in DocuSign, the broker's signature and date. Okay, 2406, addendum regarding broker's fees. This is intended to be used with any of the TREC residential contracts. And here is a source. This is a really great PDF of how to use this form. I put it here just so you would see it and have it for later use. But you also can Google how to use 2406 Texas Realtors and it will pop right up. So addendum regarding broker's fees, this is what it looks like. And this says here clearly, you should not use this addendum with the farm and ranch contract. So addendum controls. If any part of this agreement conflicts with a provision in the contract, this addendum will control. This supersedes it right here. Here are the fees, cash fees as specified will be paid in Paris County or Dallas County. Listing broker's fee, seller shall pay listing broker the fee specified in a separate written representation agreement between seller and listing broker. And then here's the term. This agreement begins on and ends at 11:59 p.m. So it's very clear here. There's no arbitrary language, very clear. Everything is very, very clear. Referring broker's fee, the receiving broker earns a fee or other payment for services rendered in connection with a transaction involving the prospect during the term. Referring broker will be entitled to a referring fee and receiving broker will pay referring broker's fee. Okay. Transactions. Referring broker will be entitled to the fees stated in this agreement in connection with, check this box, either one transaction or multiple transactions during the term. Now, when would you have multiple transactions during the term? Anyone? If you're helping an investor maybe and they're buying multiple properties.
Mm-hmm.
If a related party, a prospect agrees to buy or lease all or part of a property during the term, referring broker will be entitled to all compensation under this agreement. Related party means any assignee of prospect, any family member or relation of the prospect.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Well, we're almost to the end. And this is a summary that kind of buttons everything up, right? Because we just talked about 19 forms, and anyone who joined in a little after 9, this is being recorded, and we will have this on our YouTube channel so you can access it later. If the seller and the buyer will pay for their own brokers, so this is the scenario, the seller and the buyer are paying their own brokers, then no additional compensation agreements are required other than the listing agreement and the BRA. The representation agreements authorize the title company to pay broker fees. So there's nothing else you need to do if they're paying you. So if the listing broker agrees to pay the buyer's broker, like this is a great scenario. This is what we want, right? These are the forms you are going to need. You are going to need the compensation agreement between brokers, the ABB, that's the 2402, and that has to be executed by the listing broker and the buyer's broker before the offer is presented.
Mm.
The addendum regarding broker's fees, that's the 2406. That is executed by the seller and the buyer and can be included as part of an offer package delivered to a seller. This goes with your offer contract and may also be executed later in the transaction. So the one that has to be done before the offer is presented is that first one, the ABB, the agreement between brokers. Now checkbox D1 and insert the agreed upon amount. So paragraph D1 serves the same function as the compensation disclosure located at the bottom of page 10 of the 1 to 4 family residential contract. It notifies the title company of the broker-to-broker compensation agreement If the only fee the buyer's broker receives is from the listing broker, you can insert the amount on page 10 of the sales contract and would not need to use the addendum regarding broker's fees. So I would screenshot this. This is something that you're going to have to refer back to when you're doing your contracts. Now, to note, Trek has not revised any of their contracts. So Trek creates contracts. Texas Realtors creates forms. Because Trek can't update their contract that easily or that quickly, like the soonest they'd be able to do that is January of 25. That's why Texas Realtors came up with all of these form revisions and 3 new forms, because they want to make sure that we can operate as of August 17th in cooperation with that NAR settlement, right? Because Trek, so the NAR settlement is with the NAR, which is the association. Trek has nothing to do with the Association of Realtors. So they certainly aren't been, scrambling about this settlement. They will make adjustments if they feel it's needed. But Texas Realtors, all of their forms is to be in compliance with this NAR settlement, which releases our liability. That's what this is all about. Okay. Now, this is the scenario. If the seller agrees to pay the buyer's broker using a separate compensation agreement, then compensation agreement between the broker and the owner. This is an unrepresented seller. That's when you use the 2401, the agreement between broker owner, executed by the seller and the buyer's broker. That's when you'd use that. And you'd also use 2406, the addendum regarding broker's fees. That's executed by the seller and can be included as part of an offer package delivered to the seller. And it may also be executed later in the transaction. So you would check box D2 and D2A on the contract and insert the agreed upon amount. Okay, if the seller agrees to pay the buyer's broker as part of the sales contract, then you would just use the addendum regarding broker's fees, the 2406, executed by the seller and the buyer and can be included as part of the offer package delivered to a seller. It may also be executed later in the transaction. And again, on the contract, you would just check box D2 and D2B. Okay, I did that all in an hour. Are there any questions about any of this?
I'm sure I'll have a mountain of questions later.
I know. It's a lot of information and you have to just absorb. And you can watch this again if you want to. I do suggest looking into those resources that I put on here, and reach out to me if you have any questions. Certainly, we're all in this together.
Cool. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And quick question. I know on Skylope, whenever we go on there and we do our checklist, it will have a breakdown on all the forms that we need. Would that also be updated?
Yes, we are right now updating all of the checklists, and there's only a few that are mandatory.
Okay.
All the other ones, Isaiah, are if needed. So we also are, I'm very busy training the auditing team.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so we're all figuring this out now.
Awesome.
We're all figuring it out together, Isaiah.
Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
You
Thanks
too
for
as well.
joining.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.